Customers Matter is a podcast about customer-centred, omni-channel marketing in an age of digital disruption, mobility, and the Internet of Things. It's hosted by John O'Neill, a management consultant and founding owner of Commotion, an agency specialising in customer experience design and delivery.
So today I'm in Melbourne and I'm joined by Paul Barron, who is a digital advisor, consultant and strategist. Paul has considerable leadership experience in technology, digital marketing, social media and content areas, particularly in government, consumer marketing and a tourism context. In fact, I've known Paul for well over a decade, and for 15 years he basically was the man who ran Visit Victoria's digital presence and grew it as the times rapidly changed. He's also the president of the Australian chapter of the International Federation of IT, Travel and Tourism, and has recently become a member of Melbourne Angels Investor Group, which works with a range of startups and in both the travel and digital technology spaces. So today we're going to have a really interesting conversation, I think, and hear really about Paul's life and, most importantly, what he sees happening in this world of somewhat profound digital disruption. Paul, welcome to Customers Matter.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
So you began your career by studying IT, and people will identify a subtle Kiwi lilt, I think. Tell us a little bit about your career path and how it, how you chose the path you chose and some of the twists and turns on the way.
Well, John, I did study in New Zealand in Otago, and when I graduated, which actually I have a degree in economics, but I did do some computer science in my degree. And I came to Melbourne seeking my fortune. I figured if I failed, I could always sneak back home and just pretend that I'd been overseas on a holiday. So I came out here with a suitcase, and my dad lent me some money to buy a suit. And my first job was with a consulting company, small one, doing a lot of regional consulting. Half my job happened to be looking after the company computers. Now, this was back in 1988, so pretty early. Doing some business plans for biotech companies and things like that, but also doing a lot of computer system stuff. And then my big break was going to work for BP, where they were looking for someone who spanned the gap between business and technology, and I suppose that's been the sweet spot in my career.
So economics, so did you graduate as an economist in effect? Or?
Yeah, that's right. But it was, funnily enough, it was BP who invested in technology, my technology skills, because they wanted people who, at that time, who could make that bridge. And so they sent me on all sorts of programming courses, and I in fact worked on a C+ Infomix embedded SQL system in the UK for 6 months.
Right, so you were a code monkey.
I was a coder for a while, and look, it was fascinating, and it really, I'm really very thankful for my time with BP. Another thing, I guess, I was working at that time in the retail part of BP, and so we're rolling out forecourt systems and back office systems for what was then Food Plus and is now BP Express. And they're franchise systems where you go in and it's business in a box. You just run the shop and all your ordering systems, everything's there for your reporting systems. And it was those systems there that I was working on with a great bunch of people.
So interesting, because of course nowadays point of sale tying back into your CRM systems and so forth, it's all core to the single customer view, really.
It is. Now, interestingly enough, in those days we had a bank of modems that rang the service stations overnight and pulled back the sales data, and so we could start to do analysis on people who bought milk with petrol, and in those early days also we were thinking about shop layouts. And all of that data was sucked in to do that.
So this was sort of really trying to predictively model what people might buy and how to shape the layout of the store to make it more alluring for them to add to their purchase.
Exactly right. But anyway, all good things come to an end. I felt after 5 or so years with them, I wanted to go exploring, and I went off to Italy and did a bit of sculpture, in fact, in Florence. My then girlfriend was there as well, so we had a bit of an adventure, and It was good fun, but as often happens, we broke up. It's a funny story, really. But anyway, I ended up working in London for a bit. And then I came across an idea for a startup, and that was, it's a little bit too early for a startup, but it was 94. And that was an online space for IT contractors and professionals, a job, if you like, job bulletin board driven by content. And stories for people who wanted to work in IT contracting. So I had my own first web startup after that point.
That was probably just as someone was starting to think about Monster in America and some of these big job boards plays, Seek even.
That's right.
But as you say, 94, probably the browser was probably still...
it was pretty ordinary.
Still a Netscape.
And you were still debating about how much graphics, if any, you should use on your site because it slows it down so much. But look...
so what happened with that little venture?
I got to say, I think of it like an MBA. It cost me about as much money and took me about as much time. And of course, in those days, it's really hard to commercialise models. I went around a lot of... In those days, a lot of recruitment companies would advertise in the Australian. That was the newspaper. They'd spend an arm and a leg, and that was where you were advertised. But I went round and to try and sell advertising in the space, and they said, we're doing our own thing with websites. We're not looking to advertise online. It's very, very hard to monetize. They've got a couple of people who are prepared to sponsor the environment, but in those, this is before even listings, of real estate. If you think about how well that's done now.
So you finished your virtual MBA by actually running out of petrol, presumably, and saying, I need a real job. Is that what happened? Or?
Well, that's exactly right. But the great thing is it sort of set me up really with a bunch of digital skills at the beginning of really when a lot of companies and organisations were developing their web presences early on. And I got sucked a little bit into government.
So how did that happen, and where did you find yourself on your feet, and what happened from there?
Look, I had some good friends at a company called SMS Consulting in those days, which ultimately turned into things like Sausages, and then Sausage disappeared. So could see a lot of changes there. But I pretty much...
Was it acquired ultimately by Melbourne IT, or what?
God,
I remember SMS Consulting, but yeah.
Yeah, look, they were bought by Sausage, but then someone else bought them.
They were quite a big IT integrator at one stage.
They still exist, yeah. I think. For a podcast, I should be knowledgeable about this. Funny enough, a lot of the alumni have gone off and done other things and run consulting companies. SMS in the 90s, I think, had a famously good culture. They were pretty much a kind of group that if you needed bright people to come and help you, and they were doing a lot of work with Telstra. That's where I first started doing some work with them. They would give you best and brightest, and they'd often embed themselves in the team for a while to do big changes.
So what was your role there, and how did that lead to the next chapter in your career?
In terms of digital, it was actually doing some work for Planning and Heritage and doing all their early websites. Online. One of the things I did was the online directory of, if you want to look up the planning schemes, things like that. So early planning. At that point, Victoria was digitalising the state digital map base. So there was a lot of activity in that space. My focus was more on the consumer-facing websites.
And what year are we talking about now?
It's probably...
Early 2000s?
96, 97,
oh, wow.
98.
Okay, yeah, so Victoria was out of the blocks early.
Yeah, and then...
And the lands departments with the maps, with the geospatial mapping.
Yes, and there's also heritage, so you had a lot of heritage data. And in those times, you had internal systems that were just starting to speak to external systems. So in those days, there's a lot of Lotus Notes around. And so there was a lot of sort of plugging in Lotus Notes databases, surprisingly, and skirting that data out into the world. And, often it was just simple, the ability to look up databases.
And were you overseeing the technical solution, or were you, what exactly was the nature of your role?
I was executing stuff because, but then what happened is, and particularly through those sort of probably 96 to 99, you saw the evolution of a lot of companies delivering web stuff. And you probably saw that too, John, that suddenly saw the emergence of people providing those services because there's a growing demand. So what happened for me is I started off coming and building websites, but then I started pretty much managing the procurement of digital agencies, doing much larger projects.
As an insourced resource from SMS to government, is that?
That's right. So I was sort of an expert in there, sort of dealing as a consultant to look after the digital, not only the strategies, but the execution of projects through other people, which actually led on to my first piece of work with Tourism Victoria.
Yeah, so when and how did you sort of become involved and ultimately really the head of digital for Visit Victoria? And that was a gig, I think, that ran for about 15 years.
Yes. Well, my first introduction really, Tourism Victoria was under Jeff Floyd, was lucky enough, well, I wouldn't say lucky, they worked very hard to land about a $7.2 million budget program to make Victoria digital in a tourism sense.
And when was this?
That was 99. So September 99, I started as a project. Knew the then project director through SMS. I joined them independently of that. And he said, mate, you know about digital agencies, you know about procurement, and you know about running sort of websites. We need you to come and help us with this large project, and it was always going to be outsourced.
So I think back in that time was probably when the tourism marketing campaign that put Victoria in many respects at the forefront of tourism engagement was about to roll out, and that'd be the Jigsaw campaign. Am I right in thinking about that?
It's a little earlier. So the Jigsaw campaign, the thinking behind the Jigsaw campaign, in terms of Tourism Victoria's evolution, was really more the mid-90s. And because a lot of the early thinking happened there, prior to my arrival. This is around the Roy Morgan value segments where they were focusing on people we would describe these days as creative opinion leaders. They were particularly under people like Don Richter, Durana Wern, people of that nature, and of course that was the Bob Annals time. There's a range of things they had to do. Rationalising the regions was one part of that component, but also, I guess, positioning Melbourne. Look, the thing they did that was really good, it's not very obvious, is they were very data-driven. So they started measuring a lot of brand attributes, and they realised that no city in Australia owned things like romance. Few of them were outstanding in terms of food and wine, arts and culture. And what the plan was to say, well, let's focus on brand, because if we can position Melbourne and Victoria as a premium destination in people's minds, we can attract we can attract the premium market, because what we care about is not visitor numbers but spend. So the plan was to attract high spending visitors with the hope that they would actually spend a lot of money and have a significant impact. And they'd do that by associating the brand of Victoria as a premium brand with people, for instance, and the target was often, say, professional women aged between about 50 and 60 in typically Sydney and places like that, who, guess what they love? Food and wine, arts, culture, things of that nature. And you position Melbourne, in that case the black and white romantic Melbourne ads, as a romantic destination, for instance. You feature the arts and culture as premium destination. Shopping, of course, is part of that. Position that in their minds and try and own that. So that's what the campaign tried to do, but more importantly, they measured the impact of that campaign. And during the period of probably about 97 to 2007, you could follow graphs of how they own those brand attributes compared to competitors.
So what I find interesting about this is obviously it was a battle for hearts and minds, and as you said, it was data-driven from the get-go. So what was the digital dimension to this, and how did the digital platform play a role, if you like, and how did that evolve over time, over the 15 years, I guess?
It's a very good question. Look, even in those days, you started to, with that sum of money, the platforms, the CMS platforms, content management systems, looked towards personalisation of experience. Hard to believe now. I mean, often we're still struggling with that. This was a massive project, a massive sum of money, and the industry expectations were enormously high. There's many examples of the platforms. In this case, it was Alere Spectra, which is a cold fusion platform that we selected. But there was many examples of failed projects of this scale at that time. It was a long and torturous process so it was an 18-month project pretty much. We did launch it all went well, but there's certain things that were very complicated. So there was a bunch of new innovations at that time. This was prior to ATDW, the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, which we might touch on later. But essentially, we were the first state to have a situation where operators would, let's talk for a moment about the operator end rather than the consumer end. If you're a hotel, you'd log on to our system, create yourself a listing, upload photos, put yourself on a map, pay with a credit card, and then appear on our website.
Because there was no Airbnb, there was no stays back then. This was
no.
So this was really government marketplace making using digital platforms.
That's right. If you think about it, back in those days, back in 2001, the very early local accommodation booking companies, were one or two people. I'm thinking about the early starters. There was a lot of overseas sort of people, but not much locally, and we tried to partner with those.
So there was a recognition at Tourism Victoria, as it then was, that not only was there a job to do to place Melbourne in the hearts and minds of affluent consumers, but in order for the digital platform to work, you needed to enable the operators who had the offering to connect with that aspiration online. So you guys were really, as I say, creating a marketplace using a digital tools and technology.
I think you're spot on. I think that it's wrong to think of the whole project as $7 million spent on a website. Far from it. The website was one component, populating with product was one component, but a significant component was to try and raise the digital literacy of the industry. And in Victoria particularly, we had a lot, and in regional areas, a lot of very small businesses without much of a digital footprint.
I mean, a lot of people don't appreciate that the profile of the tourism industry is almost the inverse of any other industry, where instead of being 90% dominated by large businesses and 10% SMEs, it's 90+% SMEs and a handful of very large businesses. So
yes, right.
There's a lot more market failure, I think, in the sense that they don't have the aggregative back office systems that allow, historically anyway, for the sort of initiatives that you're describing. So that's probably why the government got involved.
And I mean, look, subsequent to that, if we talk about the needs of small business, later on in probably 2009 to 2013, we were still working on trying to raise the level of literacy in small business with digital in the digital area, because it's multifaceted, with not only with booking systems and your own websites, but social media and all of those sort of things. And it's core to marketing. And in fact, recently I was involved in a case study for Tourism Ireland, who are still struggling with that. And I suspect if you talk to regional tourism bodies today, they'll be still talking about how they can raise the level of digital literacy of their products.
So what were some of the biggest shifts that you saw during your time, during that 15-year period? So we've touched on the early days of creating, if you like, a digital marketplace to connect consumers and operators of tourism product. What else happened over that sweep of 15 years, and what are you perhaps proudest of in terms of the impact you're able to make with the digital assets that were harnessed in the name of promoting Melbourne and Victoria to across Australia and around the world?
Look, I mean, for me, there were many highlights. I mean, I got to say, if you're in a space where tourism and digital intersect, it's a huge amount of fun. I've probably stayed there too long, to be fair, but it's very hard to leave because it's so much fun. For me, so in the early days, particularly just after 2001-2, the focus for me was on traffic, because we'd spent a lot of money and we wanted to do well. But I think in particular in those early years, we did tremendously well in terms of audience share, building up I mean, it was organic. It was making, you know, the optimization of the website. That was my focus.
So how big an audience did you manage to build?
Well, we were. I know that you were in Sydney at the time, John. So I don't want to. We had the largest share of audience of any state, and that was a matter of some pride to me. And it was an ongoing around the executive team. It was an ongoing joke, you know, when we went around the table of, you know, online once again beating records in terms of the number of visitors off the back of what we were doing. I mean, it was interesting in those early days. Visitors weren't driven so much by campaigns. The optimization was critical. It's certainly, you know, these days, obviously, they're much more campaign driven, and there's a far bigger focus on paid than there was.
So just to touch on those trends, so basically you architected a strategy that had disproportionate digital eyeballs, if you like, in the early days through basically optimising Visit Tourism Victoria's website to be found through search.
That is true, but more than that, we spent more than anyone else on content. Because content drives traffic. So we had at least a team of 4 editors all the time with content. We passionately believed that content was a key not only to a visitor experience but also driving traffic. And sort of look, the internet's a great niche engine, and you know it's easy to see tourists as a kind of a mass of people charging from one thing to the rest. Yes. One thing that the optimization process showed us was that people went like this. They don't enter on the whole homepage. They went woomph. They didn't. That across all of our broader content. You know, people across the spectrum could be interested in a flower show in Ballarat, you know, or a vintage car issue, or where can I stay with pets? You know, there's not one sort of space. So you can use content to drive a very broad range of traffic into your space.
Now, of course, a couple of very significant things happened on your watch. One was the invention of the iPhone, yes. And the other, of course, was the rise of social platforms. So yes. You've spent, you know, a considerable amount of money. You've built your digital presence that you own and operate. You've optimised through great content. What happened when social and mobile came along?
That's a great question, because I think now the dates are a bit fuzzy for me, maybe 2006, 2007, from a social perspective. That's when we started to see social making an impact. Now, we had a campaign at that time, and where we used social media for the first time. Now, people were pretty sensitive about it in those times. The CEO of the time was Greg Highwood, and we spent probably the best part of 6 months convincing people up the chain, above Greg, the minister, that it is okay for us to get into social media.
And the fear was?
You can't control social media, and government is used to controlling the agenda. Remember, this was a long time ago. People are used to the idea of social media.
So at this stage, we're used to pushing our message, and we're not used to having someone come back and engage with us.
That's right.
Positively or indeed potentially negatively.
That's right. And also, we didn't know, we knew we had to moderate stuff. We knew it was 24/7 situation. The potential for people to post material, particularly there was a campaign site, if you like, to post material. If we were going to moderate it, it needed to almost appear instantly. You know, or would we post moderate? People don't like to give you content and a few weeks later have it appear. They expect even
instantaneous.
Right. So
how did you deal with this, and what happened?
Well, in that case, there's a few things. We decided we didn't necessarily have the resources to cope. We didn't know how many posts that we were going to get, and so we actually externalised the moderation of the content. Greg personally briefed the moderators of the content. So we had an external company. He personally briefed them.
So this is Greg Highwood,
Yep,
who's
that's right.
now Chief Executive of Fairfax, probably about to leave, but
Yes.
he'd been a working journalist at the Financial Review and many other publications.
That's right.
So he knew content.
He did know content. It was a post moderate, so what you post went up straight away, and then straight after, the person could view the content and decide. The purpose was to remove content after it had been posted.
So there was a lot of heavy manual, moderation and management, but surely that wasn't going to be sustainable. So what happened between then and now as it related to social platforms, and how did you end up reconciling how social platforms and government tourism agencies might relate to each other? And then I'd like to also hear a little bit about mobile. And
we will come to look. You could say that campaign gave us training wheels. We had two significant issues during that campaign that we felt, two posts that we felt had to be taken down, because one of them made a reference to a suicide, for instance. It was not intended to be a bad post, but it was not something that we wanted in that space. It was artistically.
So you moderated, but as I say, the explosion of social. I mean, I can't imagine you could possibly try and moderate all social channels.
No,
in this day and age.
No, and I think it gave us training wheels to get confident. So shortly after that, we appointed the first social media manager that I'm aware of in the Victorian government, and the first community manager. So we had people, and we had a focused strategy around that then got signed off right up to the board level. So we had the framework in which to operate, and we also took everyone on the journey of you don't have control. What was interesting in that time is that straight away social led into data. So our then social media manager was tremendously strong with data. He was Phil Lees. He was a fantastic guy.
So what were you suddenly discovering, seeing, learning as it related to data?
Well, particularly it was often an insights-driven thing. When people posted, for instance, or engaged with us in social media, we could figure out, for instance, they were in Sydney, and then maybe we could figure out later when they posted when they're in Melbourne that hey, they'd engaged with the platform in Sydney, and later on they'd actually visited Melbourne and posted something. So you started to see the challenge we often had, I think, is we had a heck of a lot of data. We had huge challenges turning data into insights into action. And I think that's still a problem for marketers today. But the platforms are getting a hell of a lot better. And so, but that's maybe we should jump to mobile too.
Tell me.
Answer. Well, we had our first. We were always trying to innovate. Our first, we had a B&B guide which was written in WAP. I don't know if you remember WAP, but it was it was a very simple HTML that you could use on the phone. So our first experiment, which was about 2001-2 area, was that we did a WAP thing, which was probably used by 3 people. The next thing we did, we worked with Telstra on a platform, I think it was called iMode, which is the Japanese version of mobile devices that were sort of popular at that time. Telstra brought it out here hoping that the Australians would adopt iMode, because this is all pre-iPhone stuff. And so we did an experiment there with them on that, and of course about 6 people probably used it. And then the iPhone turned up. And, straight away you knew things were changing and were about to change. However, like many people, early experiments with apps generally weren't that successful. Apps were, for us, we found people weren't inclined to download them unless we promoted them strongly as a thing. We often used apps as part of campaigns too, as experimental things, but it wasn't really until mobile web took off that the traffic we got from mobile visitation went through the roof.
And when was this? When did it really start to kick in?
Probably 2010, I'm thinking. That you suddenly... I can't remember the date, but I remember talking to Mike Hauser, who's now the head of digital at Visit Victoria. We were trying to guess when mobile was going to overtake sort of desktop. And it was creeping up there, and when was it going to get over 50%? And you know, at that time, and you probably remember, Google started talking about, and others started talking about designing for mobile first. I mean, that was over 5 years ago now. So we were starting to think about what mobile experiences look like.
So the digital ecosystem, tell me, how does a business in this day and age reconcile social platforms, its own website, CRM, mobile? How do you make sense of all this if you're trying to engage an audience?
Well, these days, if you're in digital, even if you're in marketing, let's not say digital, you need a fantastically solid marketing technology infrastructure behind what you're doing, because you want to track somebody from the moment they first see a bit of your marketing through to the early engagement with you, through to perhaps a purchase, post-purchase. Also, them speaking about your product, what happens next, all of those things. So, and then an ongoing engagement. And I'm not just talking about people selling products. I'm even talking about the government in this instance, but I'll come back to that in a moment. So particularly toward the end of my time with Tourism Victoria, Visit Victoria, a lot of the focus moved from an idea, if you like, of an email address driven kind of marketing program where you're building a profile around that, to building a profile around of someone around their social profiles, and then building pictures using what's called a DMP, data management platforms, to build a picture of a customer that you might know nothing about, apart from the fact they've just engaged with your advertising or they've just visited your website. But the ability to marry up your advertising model with social profiles and then enrich that with data from other sources available on that product allow you to build up a fantastic picture of your customer. Now, a lot of people feel a little uncomfortable with that, because if you're starting to build up profiles of customers, you know, is this going to be evil? Is it going to be good?
But these are anonymous profiles that you're describing, or are you starting to be able to see who these people are?
Very much. Once you can connect them to a social profile, and in fact, when you look at DMPs, and there's a local company, for instance, Lexor, which is a sort of a DMP type product. Lexor's DNA, if you like, is in social. They started off with a social listening platform for customers like Qantas. But then they realised, I think, that they could use the social profiles to integrate with advertising models and other data sources to build up profiles of customers that you might reasonably want to target.
So in effect, through the combination of these technologies, what we're able to do is start to identify behaviours online that are relevant to our business, and then actually materialise the people who are behaving that way and start to retarget and remarket to them. Is that essentially how it works?
That's true. And it can also be applied in some recent work that I did with the Department of Economic Development. It can be applied to all sorts of different situations to optimise customer experience. Now, for instance, the Department of Economic Development, the business engagement part, they have a database of some 30,000 businesses in Victoria. They probably actively engage with maybe 5,000 to 10,000 of those, and they use the Salesforce platform to do that. However, they're just scratching the surface regarding sort of business engagement, because if they want to communicate to a bunch of different businesses, often they'll want to communicate to a segment or a wide range of businesses. And while they've got access to the ABR, the Australian Business Register, people don't want to hear from government. You actually have to pay to communicate to businesses, really, through advertising platforms. So, but of course, that's anonymous. So in some ways, you've got to match up the anonymous part of advertising with the profiles of businesses you might have to then say, well, here's an opportunity, for instance, to employ some new people, or here's some regulatory things we've got to tell. Well, let's do that in an advertising platform, but somehow plug that into, yes, I've told that segment, or yes, I've communicated to that segment that piece of information, or yes, I've put an offer out, maybe relating to an employment issue or policy issue, but have that plug into your database so you know who you're talking to and how that responded. And with platforms like Salesforce, if you can build up pictures of people, you can integrate with their sort of DMP-like programs. And then you can have a situation where, for the sake of argument, somebody calls you up. You're running Salesforce on your desktop. You pick up your phone. Guess what? Your phone's IP enabled. you see it's Jim from Ford calling. It can pull up, as you're picking up the phone, all the information about the engagements that Jim from Ford has had with the department. You can figure out that Ford's received a grant. You can see maybe that Jim's seen some advertising on something. You can see everything, every engagement, if you like, that Jim's had or Ford's had with that department, or maybe you can see somebody else has called from Ford recently. So straight away, the customer service from a government perspective is right there, right in front of you. You get, as a government officer, a picture of that relationship with that person and have a fair idea what the needs might be. And more than that, you integrate that with your communications. So when, for instance, you see what email newsletters they got more, you can see what articles they've read. So, maybe some people might find that a bit invasive, and perhaps there is an argument it's pretty invasive, but it allows the customer service to be fantastic and a much more strategic approach in dealing with customers.
So I think it's fascinating. We started talking about, though, the small business operator. How on earth, with the complexity of what you've just described, do the small business players in this world manage to get their heads around this and leverage it? Are there ways that businesses can set up this kind of ecosystem, have this relationship with the marketplace without having to spend millions of dollars?
Yes, I think you tend to need help because you've kind of got to architect out the experience. So there are products that in themselves are not that expensive. The expense really is in the strategic end. And I suppose that's a little bit like, it's the difference between doing your own tax and getting your taxation, getting your accountant to do your tax. You as a small business, if you're capable, can research out these products, start off with some CRMs and then build up your own marketing technology platform and, integrate it with your advertising. But it's worth putting some money into the strategic end of building a platform. You don't have to spend an arm and a leg on this stuff, but you want a strategy in place. And the issue tends to be that they tend to move a lot. There tends to be technologies that are flavour of the month. For a while, everybody jumping on the Adobe platform, for instance. Now, I'm not sure how small you need to be to justify being part of the Adobe platform. I think you need to be reasonably large. But there are other competitive platforms which are cheaper, and even like Alexa is not excessively expensive to start to put your toe in the water of saying, look, let's talk about social engagement where we're for instance, sake of argument, for primarily advertising on social platforms. Let's build up a picture through a DMP of like Lexor, which will allow us to build on the social platform. We're at least connecting our marketing with our social platforms, and then we maintain a relationship in a social sense with some of our customers. So I think it's an area you have to put your toe in, but I would seek advice if you've on this space.
So Paul, it's been a fascinating journey. Just in wrapping up, tell us a bit about when did you finish up at Visit Victoria, and what are you doing with yourself now? I mean, obviously you are doing some consulting around this very topic we've been discussing, but you're also involved with angel investors, as I said at the outset. So what's life after 15 years of being consumed with all things digital and tourism now for you?
Well, like many people, I suppose, I felt for a long time that I needed to be back. When I've been in that role a long time and I loved it and I was passionate about it, in a corporate environment, you kind of lose touch with a lot of things that are happening at the cutting edge. And I used to dream of taking a desk in a co-working space surrounded by people building new businesses, and particularly in the digital space. And then look, I guess I stepped into that dream. The interesting thing is, though, more than 20 years past my last startup, my only startup, I realised I wasn't the startup guy anymore. I was the one who'd done that 20 years ago. And it was a different phase of my life. And I went to the Myriad Festival in Brisbane, and I met the Brisbane Angels there. And I realised that's what I want to be doing. Because what angel investment is, particularly in the way it's done with Melbourne Angels and Brisbane Angels, is it's a bunch of us, there's 70 of us in Melbourne, put relatively small sums of money. Collectively, it all adds up to a reasonable number, but individually small numbers of money, invest in lots of startups rather than putting all of your cash into one big startup, spare cash. And look, don't get me wrong, you actually expect to lose a lot of it because you might make 10 investments, at least 5 of them you're not going to get your money back. But the wonderful thing about it is that as an investor in these startups, you go on the journey with the founders, and it's fantastic fun, and you hope for some great outcomes. But also, I find I'm learning so much from working with those startups because, I mean, often these people, they're all in, mate. They're working for nothing. They've got the house on the line, their heart's there, and that's always exciting. And they're pushing the boundaries in a way that in a corporate environment you can never really do. And so for me, maybe this is my second MBA. I don't know. I think that sometimes we need to reinvent ourselves a bit in our career and put yourself out there. So this for me is my I suppose my second startup MBA. And look, I'm lucky because I'm doing a little bit of consulting, a little bit of angel investment, and a lot of working for free with startups. But it is tremendously rewarding. Just perhaps not financially yet, but you hope one day.
Paul, thanks for sharing your journey with us.
Thanks, John.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Customers Matter. We encourage you to subscribe and, if you like it, rate and review it. Head over to commotion.com/podcast. That's KOMOSION.com/podcast.